So some of the questions that I get asked by my students and also quite a lot of people is how do I best prepare for section 2, particularly when there's always the potential for any particular theme or topic to be presented to us on exam day. And that's a very valid question. And so that's why today I'm going to sort of try and present and also rationalize a particular approach that will help cover your basis for section 2. And so today, with any particular problem in life, first thing that we're going to do is examine the task at hand. So thankfully, ASA has very kindly provided us with the criteria for section 2. But of course, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier. So from the quotes that I've taken from the booklet, we know that in section 2, we'll be engaging with socio-cultural, personal, and also social issues. And unfortunately, those classifications are quite broad. It does not necessarily restrict the potential prompts to a particular set of themes. But the clues towards how we approach section 2 really lies in the in these statements here, where assessment focuses on the way in which ideas are integrated into a thoughtful response to the task. Control of language, grammatical structure, and expression is an integral component of a good piece of writing. So it seems here that we should be focusing more so on the ideas that we present and also how we present them in the form of language use, grammatical structure, and our expression. Importantly, all of this comes together when we realize that we're not assessed on the correctness of particular ideas or attitudes. And furthermore, pre-prepared responses and also irrelevant responses will receive a low score. And all of that just confirms that section 2 is about ideas, right? And relevant ideas that respond to a given stimulus. And that's sort of what's summarized here in that table. The thought and content and the organization and expression of our ideas. And that's sort of what will clue us in as to how we approach section 2. And of course, each response is scored independently for 3 times to minimize inter-assessor variability and ensure your score is accurate. And thankfully, ASA has also provided us with some recommendations, which are to read widely, practice critical thinking, complete essays in an hour, and also get somebody else to read your essays. These are all very important because they tell us, right? They give us hints as to what ASA is looking for and how we should succeed. Read widely. That makes absolute sense because if topics are socio-cultural and personal in nature, then naturally learning about the current affairs of the world is only going to help us better prepare our responses on the test day. Critical thinking, forming opinions and arguments is really what you're going to be doing when you're writing essays. So that is really just saying practice communicating, practice conveying your points. And in doing so, make sure that you reason, provide logic, and critically examine your ideas. Trying to complete essays under an hour, this is important, and I always tell my students this. In the exam, always assume that you're going to perform suboptimally. And this is simply by virtue of the fact that in any exam, we're all stressed, we're all anxious, maybe something happened on the way to the exam. You lost something, or you're late for the exam. So always try and factor that in. And so when you're practicing, it's always helpful to try and complete essays in 1 hour just to simulate that experience so that on the exam day, you're familiar with the anxiety, you're familiar with the stress and the testing conditions, so as to minimize that leveling down of your performance that you might normally get if you don't complete the essays in an hour. Lastly, it's often helpful to ask someone to read the essays, and this is important because 2 perspectives are more important and more valuable and productive than 1 perspective. And that's because simply we are blinded by our own weaknesses and biases. So having somebody else who have their own respective opinions, their own respective biases, basically helps us to understand new perspectives and learn things, and maybe we'll get an idea with how to approach certain things in a different manner. And of course, there's also an emphasis on the quality of the essay over the length. And this is sort of where I make the recommendation that you shouldn't be focused so much on reaching a word count. You should be focused on the ideas more than the word count. But if I were to have to give an estimate, let's say anything from 500 to 700 words would be sufficient to put you in a good position. However, be aware that anything that's above 900 words, then it's not saying that you can't make a good essay at 800 or 900 words. You definitely can, especially for those who are especially passionate about a topic. But just be aware that it's not about writing more. And clearly, ASA makes that point here. Spelling and punctuation, while it won't affect scores, I make the point to my students that assessors don't have a lot of time to mark your essays, right? And so if you make the most of your spelling and punctuation and give an overall impression of a formal piece of writing, I believe and I argue that that's going to help you in the long run, where they have a quick look and they can see that everything's spelled correctly, grammatically, it's fine, punctuation is all there. Then I believe that'll make your essay look more favorably in the eyes of the assessor. And also take days off before you look at essays. And this is the point where after we write an essay, when we look over it again, we don't really get the same effect if we put it to the side, look at it again in a couple of days, because in the sitting that you write your essay, you're obviously affected by that day's disposition. You're affected by what's happened during the day, so your thoughts are going to be the same. Whereas if you take some time away and just come back to it at a different time, you might find yourself being able to discover new truths or new ways of approaching ideas, and you might even really disagree with how you wrote the essay in the first place. And so that all comes down now to the assessment criteria. And this is from the booklet itself as well. These are the following questions that assessors aim to answer. What kind of ideas was developed? What extent and how well was the ideas explored in relation to the prompt? How structured, how organized it is, and is the language and the writing clear, fluent? And is there any details that are superfluous or anything that's inappropriate in terms of language for the topic? And knowing the assessment criteria is important because they've told us quite literally how they're going to mark. So would it not make sense to target our approach towards these assessment criteria? But how do we actually do that? And first of all, and also most of all, the question that we still need to answer is, how do we effectively prepare for the potential for any theme in the exam? And so now the answer is quite straightforward. We've actually discussed the answer before, and that is we identify the consistent requirements across all tasks. What are the consistent requirements? Well, we just covered it. It's the assessment criteria. And this is where no matter what theme, no matter what topic or piece of writing that you come up with, it will always consistently be marked against this. And so we derive our approach based off of the assessment criteria. And how do we actually do that? First thing, we identify what's important here. The development of the ideas, the extent of the development, and the exploration of the ideas, and also how are the ideas structured or organized within the writing. And then lastly, looking at the language, the clarity, the precision and the appropriateness of the terms and words selected in that writing. And so we know that we have to focus on these things. How do we make it into an actionable thing, an actionable goal? Well, to synthesize everything, we can sort of categorize everything into these three goals. Number one, generate and convey well-developed ideas that are relevant and explored with adequate depth and detail. Number two, cohesively structure key ideas and arguments to reinforce essential messages. Number three, Effectively and appropriately employ language that aids in clear, concise, and efficient communication of ideas. And these are the goals in which you should base your approach off of. And so we have goals. What do we do about them? Here, we break apart those goals and target them into specific skills. This is where we interpret prompts, because to generate and convey well-developed ideas that are relevant and explored with adequate depth and detail, we must first be able to deconstruct, dissect what's in front of us, the prompts, so that we have a good starting point and a strong foundation to build our ideas upon. From there, we then think about generating and formulating our thesis, our contention, and our arguments. After generating them, we then have to explore and structure the ideas such that we can ensure that we adequately engage the topic and adequately advance our reasoning and our ideas. And structurally, we want to make sure that we're able to organize our ideas so that it's fluent, it makes sense, and overall advances our message that we want to sort of convey in our overall essay. Applying language and expression. So this is where we want to think about how do we use the right terms, the right language, and the right expression to communicate our ideas so that there's minimal misunderstanding, ambiguity, and minimal, different interpretations to what our writing is trying to convey. And now for some practical ideas on how do we actually do this. Well, firstly, it's always important to ensure that we approach Section 2 as an on-demand task. And what I mean by this is that you have to go in with the understanding that anything, any prompt, any particular theme can be presented at you. So do not spend time, right? Do not spend time revising on essays that you're going to regurgitate in the exam. I cannot stress this enough. Write as much as possible essays, rambling, short stories, and this is because anytime you write, you are practicing those skills that we discussed, which are essential because they're targeted towards the criteria. Read as widely. This reinforces the messages of ASA. Read all different kinds of sources, scientific journals, Wikipedia pages, anything that can provide you information on the current affairs, as well as different approaches or views to what's current in the world. Different essay formats. It's important to sort of understand that there is no prescribed essay format that will guarantee success in any other way. If you are you're comfortable with writing poems, by all means, don't let anybody stop you. Explore different sources of ideas, so make the most of technology. And when you write an essay, don't just leave it there. Look at your ideas, search them up, read up on them, see what other people have to say, see what's on there, what's out there in the internet. And of course, important essay writing principles. This is really just knowing that you've got to have an introduction. What's the purpose of the introduction? Signposting your argument, having a conclusion, right? Summarizing your points. You've got to have the basics down pat before you really start to deal with Section 2 in a more effective manner. The contrast, I've said this, don't memorize ideas or essays. Okay, you're not there to regurgitate things, but you're there to respond in a dynamic and versatile fashion. You're responding to the prompts of the exam. Okay, avoid neglecting the importance of idea generation. That's very much the same message. Quotes and statistics do not offer any sort of value for effort. From a pure cost versus benefits analysis, remembering certain figures, remembering what people have said, certain intellectuals and philosophers have said, that is not efficient use of your time. And once again, there is no one prescribed way for success in Section 2. Avoid focusing on unsubstantiated marks. This is where if somebody comes up to you and say, look, this is an 80+ essay, don't believe that person. They don't know what they're talking about. You cannot make such a claim because whatever you're judging that piece of work on, it has not been officially validated by ASA, so you cannot trust what's out there. Okay, be cautious. and also be aware of the context in which the claims are being made. Could very well be a marketing scheme for all we know. And of course, don't write essays for the sake of writing essays, and this is because, right, it's not about writing 50 essays, right? It's about making sure you get the most out of your essays, and this reflects the idea that ASA wants you to look at your essays over and over. Take some time off, look at the essay, it will be worth it. So now for a bit of shameless self-advertising. The skills-based program is really my take on how to best approach Section 2. And like I've explained, the rationale for focusing on skills is because it targets the consistent requirements set out by ASA. Like we've discussed before, it's about interpreting stimuli, generating ideas, and then making sure the ideas are presented with the right expression and the right language, as well as advancing the idea sufficiently through logic, through reasoning, and making sure it's structured and organized in a coherent manner. And those are the sort of skills that will be focused on in this program, where skills, the theory behind the skills, will be explored, as well as opportunities to practice, refine those skills so that we can maximize candidate flexibility for the exam. And this, of course, this is supplemented with sample essays, essay feedback, philosophical. This is approached from a philosophical lens, which is my background into how I approach Section 2. And so I hope today this has sort of provided a bit more information on how to best approach Section 2, and also providing explanation of how to make the most out of your time. So to sort of summarize, we know that for Section 2, there is variability in the topics and themes that might be provided to us. So the best way to approach Section 2 is to identify the assessment criteria and work towards it. And that's because it's the most consistent requirement in Section 2. To work for those criteria, to work towards those criteria, we focus on essential essay writing skills, as we've discussed today. So I hope the presentation has been helpful in terms of rationalizing how to best approach Section 2, particularly with regards to what we discussed throughout the presentation. There are very actionable things or goals that can be focused on for Section 2. Of course, if there are any questions, feel free to email me and like, comment, subscribe for more content to come, and I'll be sure to answer any questions.